Hello, and welcome to our podcast on types of governments, or the concept of comparative governments. So while most of our class will focus on how the government of the United States works, there are many different types of governments employed around the world. And so we wanted to expose you to the spectrum of different ways that countries will rule themselves and talk about the pros and cons of all of these different types. So let's go ahead and see what we're talking about. As we begin, please note two very important roots that are going to help you in figuring out what words mean in this presentation. One is the root of arc or archy, which means to rule or to reign. And so you're going to see that in words such as anarchy, monarchy, hierarchy, etc. So basically when you see arc or archy, that means to rule. And then the first part of those words tell you who is ruling. Another important root is the root of crass or crassy. Again, it also means rule by. And so here is that spectrum of comparative governments that we'll be talking through in this presentation. And you can see on the bottom, and we'll start with this type of government or lack of government, the idea of ruling by none. That's going to be anarchy. It doesn't really even fit on our spectrum because there is nobody in charge. But once we get into the comparative governments and they are on this spectrum, you can see that on the left, we have nations that are ruled by all, this idea of a direct democracy. And then we could move a little bit more to the right, a rule by many, rule by a few, and then rule by one. So different types of governmental setups, depending on how many people are in charge, those government setups get different names. So as we're talking through this spectrum of comparative governments, also think about economics. Now, economics, oftentimes students think is just the study of money, and money is part of economics. But a bigger part of economics is the idea of studying costs and benefits for all choices. And when we're talking about costs and benefits, those are seen from the decision maker's perspective. For example, what appeals to you appeals to you. You determine what a cost or a benefit is to you in your view of the world. And so as we're talking through these comparative governments, there are costs and benefits to any and all perspectives or choices. So as we are describing what each type of government is, we will also prompt you to consider what are the benefits of a monarchy. What are the costs of a monarchy? Because it would be disingenuous to say, well, the best answer for government in the entire world is X, Y, or Z. Well, there are definitely going to be benefits to that, but there are also going to be costs. And so we need to be critical thinkers and examine what are the benefits and the costs to any one type of government. So let's look at the first example of a governmental structure. And so the question is, how many people rule? Who is ruling this area? And if the answer is none, then you have anarchy. And like we said before, the root an means without, and archy continues to mean rule. So anarchy literally means without rule. There's nobody in charge. There's no governmental structure. It is a free-for-all. People who believe in anarchy believe that no one should rule. There should not be a government. There should not be a state. And so that's why it doesn't really fit onto our continuum, but it is a way that areas sometimes do or don't govern themselves. And so with anarchy, in theory, everyone just gets along and things get done without any government. But in practice, there is strong potential for chaos and violence, because if everyone's doing their own thing, there is no collective society, and that may work out well for individuals within that. But history has tended to show us that humans tend, after a while, to want to consolidate power. Somebody's going to rise to the top and say, this is too messy, I'm now in charge. Well, then anarchy is over. If somebody is stepping up saying, I'm in charge, we have moved along that political spectrum. And so where do we see anarchy in the world? Well, by definition, we can't really have anarchy in an established state as an official form of government, because the definition of a state or a country is that they have some sort of ruling body. So if an area is being controlled by anarchy, meaning nobody's in charge, then it's not really a country. But we have seen times of anarchy in our nation and around the globe. Oftentimes we see after a natural disaster. It is hard for local authorities, and those authorities are the police, and that is government, to maintain law and order. People are going to seek to survive. They may break into grocery stores. That is looting. That is not legal. But then some people say, but it was necessary. I couldn't buy food after the hurricane because nobody was at the Safeway. I needed to eat. I had to break in and take whatever. And so we have seen times of anarchy in the United States, such as the 1965 Los Angeles riots and after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, where government broke down. Nobody was leading anybody. People were kind of doing whatever they felt they needed to do. That was anarchy. So if we go back to our comparative government spectrum and we ask the question, who is ruling in a comparative government? And the answer is one. Then we have potentially a monarchy. And again, by its roots, mono or mon means one. Archy means rule by. So a monarchy is rule by one person. Now, when we're talking about a monarchy, which is going to be different from a dictatorship, that one person tends to be a king, queen, prince, princess, some sort of hereditary passing of power. When we say hereditary, we mean passed down through the family. And so typically with monarchy, the ruler inherits the rule from their parents, and they rule absolutely, meaning they are the end-all, be-all decision maker of the nation. And so in early times, Middle Ages, Renaissance times, these monarchs were considered God's representative on earth through a concept called the divine right of kings, where kings were in power because their father was in power. But since they started sitting on the throne, citizens would wonder, why does Louis XIV get to be here? What gave his father or grandfather or great-grandfather the legitimacy to even start this monarchy line? And the answer oftentimes given was that, well, at some point God anointed this family to lead. And that's the concept of the divine right of kings. As monarchies move toward the more modern era, we can sometimes see monarchies combined with written constitutions. And so we call those constitutional monarchies, where there still is a hereditary power, such as a king or queen, but there's also a governing body that really does the governing of that nation. An example would be England. They have a queen in power right now, so she is a monarch, and she has a list of things that she, as the monarch, can still do here in the modern era, but a majority of the governing of England is really done by Parliament, because the written constitution took power from the monarch and gave it to Parliament and said, here's what each part of the government can do. And so examples of monarchy throughout history, the kings and queens of England, France, and Spain, like Louis XIV of France. We also have the czars of Russia, so the Romanov dynasty. So if you're familiar with the Anastasia story or the myth or even the musical or movie of Anastasia, that is a person from that Romanov dynasty where that family ruled Russia for many years. But we also have dynasties in China, Japan, the Middle East, and India. Many powerful ruling families have employed the concepts of a monarchy to keep power in their family and to pass those down through the generations, such as the Han dynasty, the Meiji period, and the Gupta dynasty of India. If we go back to our continuum and we ask the question, who is ruling? And our answer is one, yet we don't have a monarchy where power is passed down through the family, we may have a dictatorship. And the root of dictatorship is dict, D-I-C-T, which means to say. So in essence, a dictatorship is someone who comes in and just says, I'm in charge. But we do have rule by one person. Dictators tend to take over by force, and they tend to rule without opposition. Additionally, dictators we see ruling and controlling all branches of government. They are the government. And so they're not going to settle for criticism because the power of the government flows through that one person. So that one person doesn't want to be criticized, doesn't want to hear anybody thinking they're not doing a great job. So probably going to limit the freedom of the press, limit the freedom of journalists to collect information and tell the people, here's what's really going on in this country by your dictator. The dictator isn't going to allow that. They're also probably going to rule by intimidation, imprisonment, violence, the idea of controlling the population. So if the dictator says this is how it's going to be, If somebody were to be unwise enough to speak out and say, I don't think that's a great idea, I disagree, the dictator's probably going to find that person, lock them up, perhaps kill them, end their criticism of that dictator. And we often see this idea that rulers create a cult of personality. This idea that the people who truly love the dictator really love what the dictator's doing, but just who the dictator is. Like if I'm a follower of this dictator, it's because they've created this personality myth around them that they are the most powerful, that they are the ones who are right. And so the people who do support the dictator really get behind that and say, yes, absolutely, our dictator is the best one for the nation. People just fall in line with what the dictator is saying and just really think less about what's going on, but more about who is doing the leading. And so examples of dictatorships around the world and through history: Julius Caesar in ancient Rome, Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, Saddam Hussein in Iraq. If you were to study any one of these dictators, you would see how they ruled their nations lined up with the qualities we just said. Very much all about them as a person. It's all about who Stalin was and this cult of personality. You're following Stalin because you follow Stalin. That's what a good Russian would do. They're going to stifle criticism, they're going to maintain complete control, and they're going to be ruling by force and by oppression. If we go back to our continuum and we ask the question, who is ruling in a comparative government scenario? And the answer is a few people are actually ruling. We might have what's called an oligarchy. Again, archy means rule by, and the root of olig means few. So this is rule by a few or rule by a small group of people. So we've moved along the continuum. It's not just one person making every decision. We at least have a small group of people making the decisions for a nation. And kind of a subset of that oligarchy, if that small group making the decisions are religious leaders, then we have an oligarchy because it's a small group, but then we also have a theocracy. Again, crassy means rule by, theo means religion. So a theocracy is rule by religion. So those few who are leading the government, when they are religious leaders, then we would call that a theocracy. And the laws in that nation tend to come from a religious text. So not from a secular, meaning non-religious written constitution. The rules of that nation may come from a religious text, such as the Bible or the Quran or the Torah. So where do we see examples of theocracy around the globe? One is the Vatican City. This is the head of the Catholic Church. It is its own country within the country of Italy, within the city of Rome as well. And it is led by the Pope, and their governing document is the Bible. We see it in the country of Iran, which is kind of a hybrid theocracy, where we do have high ranks of religious leaders directing the direction of the country, and those religious leaders are getting their guidance from the holy book of the Quran. If we go back to our spectrum of comparative governments and we ask the question, who is ruling, and our answer is many, then we start to move into that idea of a republic, or the synonym is a representative democracy. And so again, crassy means rule by, demo means people. So when we have a government that is a republic, or a synonym, a representative democracy, we have a country that is ruled by the people. But here, the people are ruled through representatives. It's not that every single person votes on every single issue. It's that a group of people elects a representative for them to speak on their behalf at the governmental level. And those representatives represent the people who have voted them into office. And so representative democracy is a republic. They are synonyms. And in this system, people elect representatives. So for example, at that local level, people might elect a school board to make decisions on behalf of schools and districts. Not every single citizen of Thornton or Westminster or Boulder makes every single decision about schools. They have elected a school board to make certain decisions. We also hear terms like mayor or city council. At the state level, we elect governors, state representatives. At the federal level of government, we elect House of Representatives members, senators, president. And so those representatives conduct the governmental business on behalf of the people. So yes, many people are governing, many people are ruling, but those people doing the actual governing are representatives of every single voting member of the nation. We can't put everybody together, so we elect representatives. They govern for the group. And so examples of representative democracies or republics around the world, the United States. We are, if you look at it from the political science definition, we are a republic. We are a representative democracy. Not every single citizen votes on every single issue for the entire nation. We elect representatives to vote for us. And those people, in essence, govern the nation. We have turned over some power to them on our behalf in order to govern local, state, and federal levels. But we are not the only republic or representative democracy in the world. We see these other countries labeled kind of the liberal democracies: England, France, Spain, Norway, Canada, etc. These nations and others work in a similar fashion. Not every citizen votes on every single issue. They have representatives who are elected and then who do the governing for all of the people. So the United States is not the only republic in the world. Many of the countries we are allies with or that we have commonalities with also have a very similar form of government. And just consider the Pledge of Allegiance that many students say every day throughout the United States. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands. So right there, it's talking about the idea of our nation being a republic, the concept that we elect representatives to speak on our behalf. If we go back to our continuum and we ask who rules, and the answer is all people are ruling, then we probably have what's called a direct democracy. And again, crassy means rule by, demo means people. But if we have a direct democracy, which is different from a representative democracy, then in this situation, all people vote on all issues directly. And so if there was a state or country where every citizen voted on every single governmental decision, that would be a direct democracy. So if the city of New Orleans felt like they needed to add a stop sign at some intersection, then every citizen in the United States would vote on whether that stop sign should be in place. This is not the system that the United States uses because it would be too many people voting on too many issues and would take an awful long time. But where have we seen direct democracies? Well, the ancient Greek city-states, such as Sparta or Athens, they were small enough where they were allowing their citizens to vote on all issues. And so if there was a concern within the city of Athens, all citizens were able to vote on that. We also saw direct democracies in colonial America, or even some small New England towns today, where yes, they have elected a mayor, they have elected a city council, even in the modern era. But there are certainly some towns that are small enough where they could ask every citizen, do you want to put a stop sign here? Or do you want to raise the price of a dog collar to $5 instead of $4.50? Well, we also see direct democracies in some elements of current American society. There are times where every single citizen can have a direct vote. So the idea of referendums or initiatives are built into some state-level constitutions where every single person can vote directly on an issue. They don't have to go through their elected official, their elected representative. Every person casts a ballot for themselves if they choose. So while direct democracies don't really exist in the modern United States, there are elements of this idea of one person, one vote still existing in pockets. And so that's about it. Get really familiar with this continuum of comparative governments. You can see anarchy kind of hanging out by itself, that it doesn't fit because it's not a governmental structure. But then you can see the answers to the questions of who rules. If it's rule by one, we get monarchy and dictatorship. Rule by a few, rule by many, or rule by all. And again, continue to think, what are the costs and benefits of any one of these types of government? because there must be costs and benefits to any choice, and there certainly must be costs and benefits to any choice of government that a country chooses to employ in order to move that country forward. So while that's not really the focus of this podcast, as you move into the next level of contemplating this, of reflecting, of applying this, think deeply about what are the pros and cons, the benefits and the costs of any one type of government. Thanks so much for watching. As you have questions, please bring those in the class. We'll get those answered for you. Thanks, and we will see you soon.